Morning friends, welcome to the last lecture of history starting. So in this lecture I'll be covering things which are UPSC asking. First I'll discuss important commissions in British India. Second thing I'll discuss is educational development in British India. And third thing I'll discuss is important Satyagrahas. So there are famous Satyagrahas like Ahmedabad, Champaran and Kheda, but there are also a large number of not so famous Satyagrahas on which UPSC has asked questions in the last few years. So I will be giving you PDF on important personalities and their organization, movements and newspaper. I will not take a lecture for that because that's very factual. So I don't think that I need to waste my time there. Rather, I'll start with economic static part in which a lot of students have many doubts. So this will be the last lecture for history static. So first we will start with is important commissions. So I have divided the commissions into first is educational committees or commissions. So these are Hunter Commission, I will deal with all of these commissions in detail when I will be discussing the educational development part. Next is Raleigh Commission. These all deals with education. Next is Sadler Commission. After that, it's Surgeon Plan. These are the main commissions which were related to, and one last is Hartog Committee. Yeah, Hartog Committee was also there. These were the 5 main commissions which were related to education. Next we have is Famines Commission. So there were many, as you know, that famines was a very integral part of the British Raj in India, and therefore to stop or to counter famines, a number of commissions were established in India. So let us discuss the commissions. First is Strachey Commission. So Strachey Commission was established during the time of Lord Lytton, and the main focus of this commission was to give the relief to the famine stricken. Next we have is Lyell Commission. And it was during the time of Lord Elgin. And the focus of this commission was to give suggestions to the earlier report. Next we have is the MacDonald Commission. This was introduced during the time of Lord Curzon. And lastly, we have the Woodhood Commission. Now, Woodhood Commission was established to investigate in the events of Bengal famine, where millions of people were perished in 1943, and it was incorporated during the time of Lord Wavell. Next we have is important, last is the Campbell Commission. This was also for famine. Next we have is economic or commissions which are related to economic activities. So first we have is Herschel Committee. They are also, these commissions are also important for your state exam, because a lot of state exams also these commissions. So this was established during the time of Lord Lansdowne, and the focus of the commission was with regard to currency. Next we have is the Fowler Commission. It was also during the time of Lord Elgin, and the focus of the commission was on currency. Next we have is McLagan Commission. Or next we have is Monkey's Commission. This was incorporated during the time of Lord Curzon, and the focus of the commission was to plan for the expenditure on irrigation. Name is Monkinj, Monkinj. Next we have McLagan Commission. Now here the focus is on to advise for cooperative finances, and was established under Lord Harding. Next we have is Linlithgow Commission. This was during the time of Lord Irwin, and the focus of the commission was to study the problem of agriculture. Next we have is Whiteley Commission. Well, this was during the time of Lord Irwin also, and this was established to study the condition of laborers in industries and gardens. Next we have is National Planning Committee, which was established by Lord Linlithgow, and it was headed by Jawaharlal Nehru. Objective was to prepare economic plan. Next we have is Sapru Committee. Now Sapru Committee was established by Lord Kalilithgo with the objective to study the unemployment problem. Next we have is Babington Smith Commission. Now this was done to this was established by Lord Chelmsford, and focus was again currency. And lastly, we have the Flood Commission. This was established to study the tenancy in Bengal. Next we have is administrative commissions or committees, which means the commission which recommended administrative reforms. So first is Simon Commission, which I think you know more than enough. Next is Atkinson Commission. So last year also they asked one question on Butler Commission. So therefore you should not lose these one or two, because the cutoff for prelims is 105, and I have so many students who were at 102 and 103, and by 1 or 2 marks they could not clear. So that is how important 1 or 2 marks are, because see, 40 to 45 questions everybody can attempt. Anybody who has read the NCRTs and who have basic idea, they can score till 90. Then after that you have to gain points in these 6 or 7 tough questions, which majority of Janta don't or they don't they don't know. So in these areas, if they ask question on very non-famous commission, then you must be knowing that. If you know that, then you score a brownie points over the other aspirants. So Atkinson Commission. So this Atkinson Commission was introduced during the time of Lord Dufferin, and the focus of the commission was to involve or to look into aspects of or it recommended involvement of more Indians in the civil servants. Next we have is Fraser Commission. So it was introduced during the time of Lord Curzon, and this was about police reform. It recommended establishment of CID, which was later established by under Lord Curzon. Next we have is Islington Commission. This was under Lord Reading. Sorry, this was under Lord Harding. And this is technically it recommended to give 25% of high post to Indian. Next we have is Lee Commission. This was during the time of Lord Reading, and this recommended to remove the defects of civil services. So it is also related to Indianization of civil services. Next we have is Sandhurst Commission or Sandhurst Committee. also known as Skene Committee. And Motilal Nehru was the member of this scheme committee, and it suggested measures which should be taken for Indianization of Indian Army. This was established under Lord Reading. Next we have is a Butler Committee, which I'm damn sure they will not ask again because they asked last year, and it was basically it was to examine the nature of crown relation with the native states. Next we have is Mudiman Committee. Now, Mudiman Committee was under Lord Reading. It was established, and it looked into or it examined the working of diarchy under the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. Next we have is Chatfield Commission. This was related to army, and this was under Lord Lilithgow. So these are the important committees which were there during the British rule. Next we will look into is important acts. So last year they asked two questions on acts. One they asked on Factory Act, second they asked on Trade Dispute Act. So again the acts other than the Constitutional Development Acts, they also become important for the exam. So first we'll discuss labor related acts. So first labor related act was the Factory Act of 1881. And this act provided for, or it increased decided the limit for working for the children which are between the age of 7 to 12. So it said that children between 7 to 12 years, they can only work for 9 hours a day. Now this looks so inhuman with the 2018 century standards, but then 140 years ago the situation was same not just in India, it was also same in England. So in England also things were not well. I mean, when we think of England right now, we think it's like democracy, freedom of speech and everything. But 200 years back or 150 years back, things were very bad there in terms of labor rights. There was 9 hours of day for a 7-year-old guy. I mean, how could somebody be so inhuman? Next we have is that it said that there will be 4 holidays a month which will be provided to workers, and there will be fencing of machinery in the factory. Next we have is this act was only applicable for those factories which use mechanical power and which employs at least more than 100 workers. which means that majority of industries in India were outside the ambit of these Factory Act. So Second Factory Act was passed in 1891. As and when the labor movement in India started and it grew into strength, more liberal Factory Acts were passed in India. So second is the Factory Act of 1891. So Factory Act of 1891 was the second act which was passed, and it increased the age, or it increased the minimum age from 7 to 9 years. And also for children between 9 to 14 years, the work limit was decided that they have to work for 8 hours a day, and no work was allowed in the night. So for children between 9 to 14 years, 8 hours of work every day maximum, and no work in night. Also, for all women workers, working in night was prohibited, and they could only work for 11 hours a day. Also, for all workers, including male workers, 1 day rest per week was prescribed. And this act was applicable on all the units which employ 50 people or more. So last act there were 100 people, and this act there were 50 people. Next we have is the third Factory Act, which was enacted in 1911. So this act gave one recommendation, that was that certification of child age was required during his employment, and for the first time the work for adult male worker was fixed at 12 hours a day. So adult worker till now was not covered under any of the Factory Acts, adult male worker, but this act prescribed that adult male worker can only work for 12 hours a day. Next we have is Factory Act of 1922. Now, this act abolished the distinction between textile and non-textile factories, and also all workshops employing more than 20 workers were taken within the ambit of this act. So this act was applicable on all units which employ 20 and more workers. And also it increased the minimum age for children to 12 years. So earlier it was 9 years, now it will be 12 years. Next we have is Industrial Disputes Trade Union Act 1926. So Industrial Disputes Trade Union Act 1926, first time it laid down the certain conditions with respect to registration of trade unions in India. So the main condition which this act laid was that at least 50% of the office bearers in any trade union should be workers. So first condition was that 50% of office bearers because many nationalist leaders, they became part of these trade union organizations, and they were the one who became leaders of those organizations. So naturally the British did not like that, because they felt that these nationalist leaders, who were not even workers, they are brainwashing the workers. So it prescribed that 50% of the office bearers of any trade union should be worker. Second condition it laid was that the funds of the trade union will only be collected only by the recognized union. So the funds for that union will only be collected by the members of the union. Also, every trade union was to submit an yearly register to the government, in which it has to, first of all, that register should contain list of office bearers, and it will also, and the list will also contain audited statements of receipts and expenditures of trade union every year. So after passing this act, government exerted more control over the trade unions of the country. Next we have is Trade Dispute Act 1929. This is very rare that they will ask this year, but we should not leave it. So Trade Dispute Act 1929 was passed after the Bengal's jute mill strike, and it prescribed the penalties for public utility servant for launching a strike without giving a notice of 14 days. So any worker who is employed in any public utility industry or organization, like railways, like hospitals, if they want to do strike, they have to first give a notice of 14 days. Second thing which this act prescribed was that there were two types of strike it made illegal. First was sympathetic strike, which means if the kind of strike which happened during the INA trials or during the Royal Indian Mutiny, where one had the problem and other group of people went to strike on the sympathy of those people. So first was sympathetic strike, and second was coercive strike. Now coercive strike means that by strike you are forcing the government to accept the demands of the strike, and that strike is causing a severe hardship to the people. So the main what you can call coercive strike is that by your strike it has led to severe hardships among the people, and because of this severe hardship, government is forced to accept your demand. So that type of strike was called as coercive strike. So this act made sympathetic strike and coercive strike both illegal. Next we have is Bombay Industrial Disputes Act. Now this act was enacted in 1938, and it was related to cotton textile mills, and most of the cotton textile mill owners were Indians. Therefore, Congress, being a multi-class movement, it wanted to establish harmony among the laborers and the owners. Therefore, this act gave focus on arbitration, on both conciliation and arbitration, and this act made or it provided for a lock-in period where opportunity would be given to arbitration and conciliation, and once this arbitration and conciliation fails, only then the workers were allowed to go for strike. So naturally this was done by the Congress government when they came to power in number of provinces, and they therefore wanted to have a industrial harmony, and for that they enacted this act. Next we have is other acts not related to labors. So first is Vernacular Press Act. So Vernacular Press Act it empowered the magistrate to secure an undertaking from the editor that he will not publish anything which propagates dissatisfaction against the British government, and if he does that, his press will be seized, his equipments will be seized, his area or his office will also be seized by the district magistrate. So main thing is that you have to give bond undertaking in the DM office that you will not publish anything like that, and if you will publish like that, the DM will have the order to seize your each and every thing. And another thing it said was that you have no appeal to the you cannot go for appeal against the DM's action. So that again went against the concept of natural justice. How could a DM, maybe DM, I'm publishing some news about DM, and DM naturally will not like that, and DM will definitely, he will use this act to seize my press, but I also don't have any option to appeal in the higher courts. So that is why it was a very draconian act, and this was responsible for rise of nationalism in India. Next we have is the Arms Act. So Arms Act also came under Lord Lytton, and it prevented the Indians to keep armaments without appropriate license, but the Britishers and Anglo-Indians, they were exempted from these acts. So again, this was a discriminatory act. Next we have is Dramatic Performances Act. This again was the brainchild of Lord Lytton. So at that time, Indigenous plays started to gain importance in India, and there were two plays. One is Sarojini and second is Surendra Binodini. Both of them were written by Upendra Nath Das, and they tried to, these plays showed popular resentment against the racial discrimination of the British. So naturally, the British government got alarmed because they did not wanted these dramas to propagate seeds of sedition against the British government. Therefore, they came up with the act, and according to this, the government can prohibit any dramatic performance that was likely to excite feelings of dissatisfaction towards the government. Next we have is Ancient Monument Preservation Act 1904. So this was the brainchild of Lord Curzon, and this act made injury to the protected monument an offence punishable under the law. This act also established archaeological department, which was to collect the historical documents and important and conduct excavations. Next we have is Social Reforms Act. So first important act in this regard was the Hindu Widow Remarriage Act. So during this time, the widows were subjected to uh, inhuman type of conditions. Some of them were forced to go or to do sati. Those who did not do sati, they were completely shunned. They were not allowed to eat garlic and onion, because it was said in the Hindu scriptures that onions and garlic would instigate sexual feelings among the widow women. Therefore, they were prevented. They had this diet, which was a diet decided only for widows. They used to, or they were forced to wear white saris, and they were confined to a lot of number of disabilities. Therefore, Ishwar Vidyasagar, he fought with the British, and because of its pressure, Hindu Widows Remarriage Act was passed, and under this act, it provided legal safeguards against loss of certain types of forms of inheritance for remarrying a Hindu widow. So at that time, according to Hindu laws, if you marry a widow, that led to what you call is loss of inheritance. So if I marry a widow, I will lose all the property of my dad or of my father. So this naturally this incentivized many people to marry Hindu widow. Therefore, it said that there would be legal safeguard which will protect his inheritance right, even if he marries a widow. Second thing this act provided was that the widow who would remarry, he would not get any kind of inheritance from his husband or from its prior husband's family. So that was the second component of this act. And third component was that Hindu child widows whose husband had died before the consummation of marriage, they were also protected under this act. Next we have is Age of Consent Bill 1891. So Age of Consent Bill was a very debated act, and this increased the age of consent for sexual intercourse for all girls married or unmarried from 10 years to 12 years. So it increased the age from 10 to 12 years. Now it is 18 years. And even this minimal age of 10 to 12 years was not liked by some of our nationalist leaders like Bal Gangadhar Tilak and many other extremists, because they believe that that's a interfere in the Hindu practices, and therefore they were against that. But the moderates were very much in favor of this age of consent bill, because they were more liberal and they were more secularist. The biggest fight against this age of consent bill was done by a person called as Behramji Malabari. He was someone who fought very fiercely in favor of passage of this act. Next we have is Child Marriage Restraint Act. So Child Marriage Restraint Act is also known as Sharda Act, because it was passed because of efforts of Harbilas Sarda. So it increased the age of marriage for girls to 14 years and for boys to 18 years. Next we will discuss is educational development in British India. So this is a very important topic again because of large number of committees and commissions. So when the British came to India, before that, what kind of education did we have? We had a what you call as Gurukul, or what we have is the madrasa kind of education. The modern education was non-existent in India during the pre-British rule. So when Britishers came to India, for the first 60 years or for the first 50 years, they were hardly established in educating Indians because their focus was only on appropriation of as much of fund or resources from India back to Britain. That was their only concern. Therefore, they hardly focused on the education. But during the early 19th century, there were three main mediums of modern education in India which emerged. First was the English or the East India Company itself. Second was the Christian missionaries. And third was the social reformers. So the East India Company, it wanted some educated Indians because they wanted to Indians who could assist them in the administration of the land. Because for junior ranks, calling people from England was becoming very expensive for the East India Company. The rate at which an Englishman used to work, 1/10 rate the Indian used to work. So they wanted some Indians to take the post of lower administrative posts in the East India Company. Secondly, they wanted to focus on education or to develop education in order to understand the local laws and customs. And therefore, for this purpose, two institutions were formed in India. First was the Calcutta Madrasa, which was opened by Lord Warren Hastings. And second was the Sanskrit College, which was established by Jonathan Duncan. So first time the government focused on education was in 1813 Charter Act, which provided for 1 lakh rupees of sum for development of education in India. Second we have is Christian missionaries. So Christian missionaries wanted to have modern or to implement or to bring modern education in India because they thought that if somebody will study modern education or Western sciences, they would convert to Christianity. They would leave their native religion. Therefore, their main focus for education in India was proselytization. And thirdly was the social reformers who wanted modern education in India because they wanted to have a rational, or they want to move with time, because they thought that we have become so outdated because of lack of modern education. Therefore, if we'll have modern education, then we will develop scientific and rational outlook. So for the first time in 1813, as I've discussed, the step was taken by East India Company towards education, but this sum was not spent till 1823 because there was debate going on at that time between Orientalists and the liberals. So Orientalists were basically, they wanted that this 1 lakh rupee should be used in teaching Indian education in vernacular languages, because they felt that Indian education and Indian sciences or Indian culture was different from the Britain, but it was not necessarily inferior to the Britain. But the liberals, they had very big contempt for the Indian education, Indian culture, Indian languages, and therefore they kind of pressurized in favor of teaching Indians Western education in English language. Finally, in 1823, the Orientalist had its way, and therefore Indian teaching was taught in the vernacular language till 1835. So 1833 to 1835, Orientalists had their say. But in 1835, Lord Ripon was the Governor General of India, and Lord Ripon appointed Thomas Macaulay as the chairman of General Committee of Public Instruction. And he gave his famous Macaulay Minute. So Macaulay, just like William Benedict, I think I said Lord Ripon, but it's not Lord Ripon, it's Lord William Benedict, who was the Governor General. So Lord Macaulay, just like Lord William Benedict, was both of them belonged to the era of Enlightenment. So both of them were liberals, they were Benthamites, and they wanted to civilize the Indians, which they believe the Indians are lacking. And Macaulay had a contempt of anything Indian. He was a firm believer in the European superiority. He famously quoted that a shelf of good English library it contains more information than the whole literature of India and Arabia. So he was a big time imperialist, and he was a big time racial superiorist, and he believed in the white man's burden theory, which meant that white men, since they are white, they are given or they have been given, it's kind of a duty by the God to civilize the non-white people, and therefore he said that we will be going against the duty if we teach this unholy and this, irrational Indian education to these people. Therefore, our job should be to teach them Western education in English language. So Macaulay wanted to create what we call as brown sahibs, which were Indians in color but British in taste, in habits, and in dressing and in language, because he thought that these people will have contempt for everything Indian, and they would be biggest allies, or they would be the biggest supporters of British imperialism. Also, Macaulay's Minute it relied on trickle-down theory, which means it said that since we don't have much funds for education, what we should do is we should teach this upper class and this middle class Indian leaders or Indian people, and since they are the natural leaders of the people of India, they will then teach the lower people, or they will teach the lower class people. So it believed in that trickle down theory, and therefore this was accepted, and since 1835 to 1853, India followed the policy of Macaulay. Finally, and after this 1835, there were two institutions which were established. First was Elphinstone College in Bombay, and second was the Calcutta Medical College. Next we have is Wood's Dispatch. So Sir Charles Wood, who was the president of Board of Control of English East India Company, had an important effect on spreading English learning and female education in India. So in 1854, he sent a dispatch to Lord Dalhousie, and Wood had following suggestions. So these suggestions were, firstly, he suggested that primary school must adopt vernacular language, because he believed that in primary schools, when we teach in English language, these people, they don't understand anything, and then their base remains weak, that hurts them in future life also. So he recommended that in primary school vernacular language should be taught. In high school should adopt Anglo vernacular language, and in college English medium should be taught. So he set three types of education. First is primary, where we should taught vernacular. Then secondary, where we should, or high school, where we should Anglo vernacular, which means some English and some vernacular. And then in college we should teach in English. Also, he said that this trickle down theory has failed to spread education in India, and therefore this dispatch abandoned the trickle down theory, and it ordered the government to take responsibility of education themselves. So that is why it is called as the Magna Carta of Indian educational reforms. So it recommended that English department should be set up in every province. It also recommended that at least one government school should be set up in each district. It recommended that private schools which are affiliated to the government should be given grant and aid. It also recommended that universities on the model of University of London should be established in Bombay, Calcutta and Madras. It recommended that government should support education for women, and also and what were the effects of this dispatch? So it led to the establishment of the University of Calcutta, Bombay and Madras in 1857. So after Wood's dispatch, for 30 years Indian education system was governed on the basis of Wood's dispatch. Next commission which came was Hunter Commission. It came in 1883. It was appointed in 1883, and it was appointed during the reign of Lord Ripon. And it recommended, it gave the main purpose of this Hunter Commission was to review the working of Wood's dispatch. And it found that Wood's dispatch has not been working really efficiently. Therefore, it gave number of recommendations with respect to both primary education and secondary education. So let's first deal with the recommendation given by it with respect to primary education. So as you know that in 1880s, Lord Ripon had established local boards or local bodies or municipal boards where he has given power to locals or Indians, and most of them were elected by the people. Therefore, this Hunter Commission, it gave responsibility of primary education to these newly appointed district board or municipal boards. Because it thought that these people are well connected with the people, and therefore they would be, the kind of course they will give in this primary education would be more relevant to the needs of the masses. Also, these district and municipal funds, they were directed to assign some specific funds for primary education. And second recommendation which it gave was that it emphasized the promotion of physical development of the pupils by encouragement of native games. With respect to secondary education also, it gave number of recommendations. So with respect to secondary education, it recommended gradual withdrawal of government from this field and to transfer the secondary education to efficient private bodies. And it said that the role of government should be to give grant in aid to these private bodies who will manage the secondary education. Secondly, it recommended that at secondary stage there should be two type of courses which should be introduced, because see, not everybody is equally efficient, not everybody is equally talented, not everybody is equally interested in having more or higher academic education. Therefore, it said that in the secondary education there should be two type of courses which should be established. First should be for those students who are academically interested, inclined, efficient, and you want to further continue in the university, they should be prepared, or they should be taught, or they should be prepared for giving entrance exam of the universities. And second should be, or second course should be designed for those people who are not academically inclined, who do not want to further continue education. So for them the course should be of more practical nature, which means that they should be taught more vocational education, skill development, so that after they have completed their secondary education, they can start their some work. Another thing which is recommended was that model government high schools should be established in each district. Next commission which recommended with respect to education was Raleigh Commission. So these Raleigh Commission, it was the backdrop of this appointment of this commission was that Lord Curzon was the Governor General, and Curzon thought that the universities in India are producing this political revolutionary. It has become it has become Mecca for producing these political revolutionaries who are launching armed struggle against the British. Therefore, it wanted to extend or increase government control in these universities, and for that purpose this Raleigh Commission was appointed. So it gave certain recommendations which were incorporated by the government, and it was passed in the Indian Universities Act of 1905. So the key provisions of 1904 Indian Universities Act were following. Firstly, the universities were to given more attention to study and research. Secondly, the number of fellows of university and their period in office were reduced, and most fellows were to be nominated by the government. Because these research scholars, they were the one who were propagating more dissatisfaction against the British. Thirdly, it recommended that government was to have veto or government have powers to veto university senate regulations and could amend these regulations or pass the regulations on its own. Also, conditions were made stricter for affiliation of private college. Next we have is Sadler Commission. So this Sadler Commission was appointed to look into the condition of Calcutta University and to suggest some improvement, but it gave most of the recommendation with respect to secondary education, because according to Sadler, till we not improve the secondary till we not improve the condition of secondary education in India, the condition of university education could not be improved. Therefore, it recommended that the dividing line, because till that time there was metric, which was class 10th, and after metric you directly used to enter the university. But this commission brought a new category of class, which was called as intermediate education. And this intermediate education, it will be between the metric and the college. It could either be in the school, or separate intermediate colleges could be established, and in these colleges there will be education or teaching in art, science, medicine, engineering, and other fields. So he recommended what we have right now, that there should be inter, which should be established, and this intermediate education would be kind of a buffer where the people who want to or who are interested in the university education, they can go there, or if they are not interested in university education, they can complete their intermediate and then they can leave education. So it's recommended that a board of secondary and intermediate education should be established, which should consist of representatives of government, university, high school, and intermediate college, and that board should regulate the intermediate education. Also, it recommended that school course should be of 12 years, which means 10 years of metric plus 2 years of inter. It also recommended that duration of degree course should be limited to 3 years. Also, it recommended that centralized residential teaching universities should be encouraged. So at that time, there were a number of affiliated colleges, which the trend of affiliated colleges had started to develop. So therefore, it recommended that government should focus on establishing more centralized residential universities, which means only one university will be there and all courses will be there. There would be no affiliated college of that university. Like in DU, you have 80 or 90 colleges. Not like this. It should be like that where there is only one university and there should be no affiliated colleges. Another thing it recommended was the women's education. So it said that there should be special board of women education, which should be established in Calcutta University. Also, it recommended that there should be or more facilities should be made for training teachers, and there should be Department of Education, which should be set up at University of Calcutta and Dhaka. And lastly, it recommended that there should be more number of universities which should be established in India, given the need we have. Next commission or next scheme related to education was the Sargent scheme. So this Sargent scheme it came up in 1944 during the time of Lord Wavell, and the central goal of this scheme was educational reconstruction of India. and it recommended the introduction of free and compulsory education for all Indian children between the age of 6 and 12. So it's the first time this thing happened anywhere in India. I mean, before that, Baroda and I think Travancore had adopted this thing. Also, it aimed that there should be universal literacy in India within 40 years. And it recommended that there should be establishment of two types of school, elementary school and high school, and high school should be of two types, academic and vocational, just like the Hunter Commission. It also recommended that intermediate education should be abolished. Next we have is Vardha scheme of education. So, the Vardha scheme, see what happened in 35 was that there was provincial autonomy which was given, and based on 35 Act in 37, elections took place in which Congress came to power in most of the provinces. When Congress came to power in most of the provinces, there was this meeting in Congress about what should be the education system in these provinces, because education was the state subject. So therefore, Gandhiji had its own plan, and there was this All India Education Conference which was held in Wardha in 1937, and it discussed the idea of Gandhiji and passed the following resolutions. So these resolutions were provision of free and compulsory education for 7 years. Secondly, relating education with manual and productive work and some form of handicraft, which means during teaching they should also be taught some natural skills or some technical skills. And lastly, the media of instruction should be mother tongue. So after this resolution, a committee was formed under the chairmanship of Dr. Zakir Hussain, who later became the President of India, to prepare a scheme of education keeping in view the suggestions of the resolution. And therefore, he also, gave some recommendation that there should be no place for English in the curriculum, and there should be no place for religious education in this scheme. So this ends our education related initiatives. Last topic which we will discuss is important Satyagrahas. So all of you must be aware of Ahmedabad, Khera and Champaran, but there were also some other not so popular Satyagrahas which happened during our freedom movement, and UPSC is more interested in these unpopular Satyagrahas rather than they would ask you Champaran or Kheda. So let's discuss the important Satyagrahas during the Indian national movement. So first is Vaikom Satyagraha. So Vaikom Satyagraha was a movement in Travancore, which is currently modern day Kerala. At that time there was king of or Raja of Travancore who was the king there, and in his province there was no entry for depressed classes in the temples. So when we compare this, after 100 years, Kerala is most progressive in terms of the social reform. But 100 years back, even in Kerala also, the depressed class, especially the Izawas, they were treated with a lot of inhuman, acts. So there was this temple in Vaikom, Shiva temple, which disallowed the entry of untouchables in the temple, and not just in Vaikom, but in every other place, every other temple in Kerala did the same. Even the road which were going to, or the road which used to go to temple, the depressed class were prevented from walking in that road also, because the priest thought that this will make the temples unpure. So therefore, in the 1923 Kakanda meet of the Congress party, T.K. Madhavan, he presented a report citing the discrimination faced by the depressed classes in Kerala, and that session decided to promote anti-untouchability movement or freedom entry movements in whole of Kerala. Therefore, two leaders emerged from this movement. One was T.K. Madhavan and second was K. Kelappan. So both of them, they launched the movement, or they launched a Satyagraha demanding the entry of untouchables in the temples. And the Satyagrahis, they tried to enter the temple with lower caste, and they were resisted and arrested by the police. So Gandhiji, Sri Narayan Guru, they all gave support to these leaders, and a lot of Christian and Muslim leaders also came forward, but Gandhiji advised them to not help these people because they wanted it to be a intra-Hindu affair. Finally, on the advice of Gandhiji, this movement was withdrawn temporarily on April 24, and these leaders and Gandhiji met the regent or the queen of Travancore, demanding entry of untouchables inside the temple. But there was no approval from the side or from the side of regent. Ultimately, the movement failed. Next we have is Borsat Satyagraha. So you need to remember these leaders and the purpose of this Satyagraha. So leaders are T.K. Madhavan and K. Kelappan, while the objective was to make temple entry for the untouchables. And Gandhiji and Sri Narayan Guru supported this movement, and ultimately this movement was a failure. So 4 aspects you have to remember about the Vaikom Satyagraha. Next we have is Borsat Satyagraha. So this Borsat Satyagraha was Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel was associated with this Satyagraha. And what really happened was that there was increase in dacoity in Borsad area of Gujarat, and to fight against dacoity, government imposed the tax on the farmers or the peasants. Now farmers and the peasants, they believe that this dacoity is happening because of collusion between the police and the dacoits. Therefore government should first take care of the police, it should reform their police, it should punish the police rather than punishing us in the form of taxes, because the farmers think that we already are paying so much tax and now you are imposing one more tax. Therefore Patel told these farmers that don't pay the tax, try to use civil disobedience, and therefore all these talukas, they refused to pay taxes, and they also prevented the seizure of their properties and land, and there was complete cohesion. And after prolonged struggle, when there was increasing pressure on the government finally withdrew this tax, and Sardar Patel he emerged as a great leader of Gujarat. So this Borsad Satyagraha is different from Bardoli. So Bardoli is different. Bardoli we have already dealt. Borsad is this kind of Satyagraha. Next we have Bardoli, we have already dealt. Next we have is Dharsana Satyagraha. So again, Dharsana Satyagraha is associated with non-cooperation movement, not non-cooperation, civil disobedience movement. And during this movement, Gandhiji tried to break a lot of salt laws. So in Dharsana, which is a town in Gujarat, there was this salt factory, and the British government did monopolize the salt, which was considered as against Indian freedom, because the nationalists were demanding that every individual or every human or every family should have the right to make their own salt. So therefore Gandhiji told the British that I will try to liberate this Dharsana mill from the monopoly of British by using non-violent means. And therefore Gandhiji went there and he was arrested before he could reach the mills. Therefore the movement continued under Nehru and Patel, and they were also arrested. Later they were replaced by a guy called Abbas Tayyabji, who was a 76-year-old judge, and he was a great follower of Gandhi. So Abbas Tayyabji, he went there and he also tried to break the laws, but he was also arrested. After he was arrested, the leaders, this movement or this Satyagraha, it continued under Maulana Azad and Sarojini Naidu, and later finally they were also arrested and the Satyagraha came to end. Next we have is the Guruvayur Satyagraha. Now, Guruvayur Satyagraha it took place in Guruvayur, which is in Thrissur district, which is again in Kerala, and it is again same kind of movement. It tried to promote temple entry for Dalits in temples. And the leader of this movement was K. Kelappan. So he tried to increase. He led a satyagraha of Varnas and Pavarnas, and ultimately he was arrested. Then he went for hunger strike, and nothing changed. After that he went for hunger strike till his death, but he was prevented by Gandhiji, and he was forced by Gandhiji, or he was persuaded by Gandhiji to break his fast. And other leaders who supported him were A.K. Gopalan and N.P.D. Nair. And this movement also failed, but ultimately in 1936 finally the Maharaja of Travancore, he allowed Dalits to enter temple. So even though this Vaikom and Guruvayur Satyagraha failed initially, but in long run they created an atmosphere in Kerala which ultimately forced the king to allow or to pass law in favor of temple entry of Dalits. Next we have is Vedaranyam Satyagraha. Now this was asked by UPSC, I think 2 years back. So this Vedaranyam Satyagraha was kind of a Dandi march of Tamil Nadu, and only difference was that it was launched by C. Rajagopalachari. Was he with his 150 volunteers, most of them were from INC, and they started from Tiruchirappalli and they went till Vedanarayam, which is a coastal town in Tamil Nadu, and they tried to break the salt laws by making salt. And ultimately they were arrested. So it was just like the Dandi March of South India, and along with or as part of March, Rajagopalachari also created awareness with respect to caste discrimination and khadi. Next we have is flag satyagraha. So flag satyagraha is actually, it's a campaign of peaceful civil disobedience during the Indian independence. There is not one satyagraha, there have been number of flag satyagrahas in different parts of India, and the flag satyagraha basically it focused on exercising the right and freedom to hoist national flag and challenge the legitimacy of British rule in India through the defiance of laws prohibiting the hosting of nationalist flag. So forcibly, number of people, they used to go to these government buildings. At the top of the building, they used to hoist the flags. So it was used during the non-cooperation movement, during the civil during the Quit India movement. The most famous among them was the Nagpur flags satyagraha during 1923. So this ends our history lectures, and now we will be starting economic, static and polity current affairs. Thank you.